On a frozen night high in the Colorado mountains, a cabin camera captured something that shook the entire ridge. A wounded mountain lion cub, barely standing, dragged itself to the baby's crib and tapped its paw on the floor as if giving one final warning. Outside, a wolf's shadow and a stranger with dark intentions closed in. No one understood why a wild creature would risk its life for a child. Not until the truth finally came to light. The late winter sun hung low over the Colorado timberline, casting long stripes of gold across the Walker family's remote cabin. Emily Hayes eased her truck to a stop beside the wooden porch, listening to the hush that lived in these mountains. No traffic, no neighbors, just wind slipping through the pines and the soft rumble of a distant creek. For most people, life out here felt too quiet. For Emily, who studied wildlife behavior at the community college and worked part-time as a babysitter, silence was comfort. Until tonight, she believed this place was one of the safest corners of the Rockies. Inside, baby Liam lay on a woven rug, kicking his legs gently and babbling to himself in the warm pool of afternoon light. His cheeks were rosy, his tiny hands exploring the air with the soft curiosity that made Emily's heart ease every time she watched him. The Walkers stood near the door, gathering coats and keys, grateful for a rare chance to drive into town for groceries and some needed financial planning help. Out here, everything, from insurance paperwork to solar maintenance, took longer than it should. They trusted Emily completely, and she appreciated that more than they realized. Before stepping out, Mark Walker paused and nodded toward the back of the house. "He's still in the warming pen," he said quietly. "Hasn't tried to move much. Just keep an ear out." Emily nodded. She already knew who he was. The mountain lion cub, no more than 8 months old, had been found 2 nights earlier beneath a fir tree, shivering and limping after a rock slide. Mark, who volunteered with a wildlife rescue program, had carried the cub home when the roads iced over and the rescue truck couldn't make it up the ridge. The plan was simple: keep him warm, hydrated, fed, and call for transport in the morning. But the morning had turned into another day, and then another, as storms rolled in across the mountains and road closures stacked up. The cub wasn't tame. Emily knew that, but he wasn't wild in the way people feared either. He slept most of the time, curled into a tight golden-brown coil under a heat lamp, his breath shallow and uneven. The Walkers placed a wildlife camera inside the pen, mostly for reassurance, partly out of caution. Injured animals could change behavior quickly, and Emily understood the risk. Still, something about the cub's eyes unsettled her. They weren't frantic or panicked the way wounded predators often looked. They were watchful, ancient in a way she couldn't describe. The Walkers backed down the long gravel drive, tires crunching over the thin frost. The rumble of the engine faded into the canyon, leaving only the whisper of wind against the roof. Emily locked the door behind them and glanced through the wide kitchen window toward the small wooden pen at the edge of the property. Everything looked still. The heat lamp glowed a soft red. No movement. Good. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the kind advertised endlessly online as organic, high antioxidant, heart healthy, a reminder of how even mountain living couldn't escape modern marketing. Then she carried Liam to the living room and set him in the center of the rug with his wooden toy blocks. He squealed in delight when she clapped her hands, then settled into that sweet, rhythmic baby babble that made even the hardest days seem softer. But just as Emily began picking up stray toys, a faint metallic click drifted through the house, barely noticeable, easy to dismiss. She froze. Not fear, only curiosity. Cabin walls always made noise in the cold. Wood shifted, nails settled, the stovepipe expanded and cooled. Nothing unusual. She shook her head and continued tidying. The second sound, however, was not the house. It came from outside, from the direction of the warming pen. A soft creak, then the slightest scrape. Emily's chest tightened. She walked to the back window and pulled the curtain aside. The pen stood where it always had, but something looked off. The latch wasn't vertical anymore. It hung at a slant. Had Mark checked it properly before leaving? She looked again. The door wasn't open, but it wasn't fully shut either. It hung in that in-between space that invited questions. Before her mind could coil around the uncertainty, Liam let out a sudden giggle, the sound bright and pure. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at his toys. He was looking past her shoulder, straight toward the window, toward the pen. Emily turned. The mountain lion cub was standing just outside the porch light, half-shadowed beneath the tall pines. He wasn't limping the way he had earlier. He wasn't staggering. He was quiet, too quiet, and focused not on her, but on the baby behind her. His ears angled forward, his tail low, not with aggression, but with intention. He took one slow step toward the porch. Emily's breath caught. This wasn't possible. The door on the pen had been locked. She had checked it herself. And yet the cub stood there, fur highlighted by the dying sun, chest rising with deep, uneven breaths. Liam babbled again, softer this time, almost as if answering something only he could hear. Emily felt the hair on her arms lift. The cub didn't move any closer. Instead, he turned his head sharply toward the line of trees, listening with a posture so alert, so instinctive, it sent a ripple through her. His gaze wasn't on her, wasn't on Liam. It was locked onto the forest itself, as if something beyond the trees had whispered his name. And then, just for a moment, his eyes flicked back to the baby. Not with hunger, not with fear, but with warning. Emily stepped backward, one hand tightening on the edge of Liam's blanket. A coldness settled beneath her ribs, a deep and ancient reminder that even in a world built on insurance plans, home security systems, and online emergency guides, the mountains still operated on. Older rules, rules written in instinct, danger, and silence. What Emily didn't know, not yet, was that the cabin's outdoor camera had already captured the first clue. Long before she noticed the loose latch, long before she saw the cub. A tall shadow had passed between the trees at the edge of the ridge. Something, or someone, was already watching the house. "Liam," she whispered, voice tightening, "stay close to me." Outside, the cub took one final breath, squared his stance, and stared into the forest. The Rockies were no longer quiet. Not tonight. The first warning had come, not from a human voice, not from a device or alarm, but from a mountain lion cub who sensed danger long before any person realized the ridge was no longer theirs alone. Emily swallowed hard, lifting Liam into her arms. Whatever was coming, the cub had already heard it, and the real story, what the camera would later reveal, was only just beginning. The wind shifted the moment Emily pulled the door shut behind her. It wasn't strong, not even cold, just different, like the air itself held its breath. She kept one arm wrapped around Liam, his small fingers gripping her shirt as if he sensed the change too. The mountain lion cub stood several yards away, still as a carving, ears pointed toward the darkening forest. No growl, no warning hiss. Only focus. That, more than anything, unnerved her. The sun had dipped behind the ridge faster than she expected, leaving a dim copper glow scattered across the snow-dusted ground. In daylight, this part of Colorado felt peaceful, almost serene. But in the twilight, with shadows stretching under the pines, the same landscape felt older, closer to the way things had been before people ever lived here. A wilderness that made its own rules. The cub finally moved, not toward the forest, not toward Emily. He took a slow, deliberate step toward the cabin porch and stopped at the foot of the wooden stairs. His injured hind leg trembled, but he didn't back away. Instead, he lifted his head, staring directly at her with a clarity that tightened her chest. She'd studied animal communication enough to recognize intent when she saw it. This wasn't wandering or curiosity. This was a message. Liam let out a soft hum, pressing his cheek into her shoulder. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. Infants had a strange intuition, responding to tone and rhythm long before understanding danger. He watched the cub with a seriousness that didn't belong to someone his age, as though something inside him understood the stillness in the animal's body. The forest creaked behind them, a low, distant crack, like a branch snapping under weight. Emily's breath froze. Out here, most noises came from elk or mule deer, but she knew the sound of prey, and she knew the sound of something heavier, something hunting. The cub whipped his head toward the sound, muscles tightening beneath his tawny coat. His tail dropped lower, sweeping across the ground. Then he did something so precise it made Emily's skin prickle. Tap, a pause, tap, tap. He tapped his paw against the porch step, claws barely clicking against the wood. A rhythm, the same odd sequence she heard earlier through the cabin floorboards. 2, pause, 2. Not random, not restless movement. A signal, a warning. Emily swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her chest like a cold stone. She stepped backward toward the door, her free hand fumbling behind her for the handle. The cub's eyes followed her, but he didn't approach. He simply repeated the taps, softer this time, almost urging her. She didn't know what the pattern meant, but she felt the intent of it in her bones. Stay in, stay safe, stay with the baby. When the door finally swung open, a gust of warm cabin air washed over them. Emily stepped inside, shut the door quickly, and locked it. She held Liam close, feeling his breath steady, against her neck. But instead of calming her, the familiar scent of the wooden interior made her pulse race. The house suddenly felt too small, too thin, its walls no match for whatever moved beneath the trees. She walked to the living room window and pulled the curtain aside with trembling fingers. The cub was still there, faintly illuminated by the porch light. He paced once, limping but determined, before stopping again and staring toward the forest. Emily looked too, squinting into the fading light, unsure what she hoped to see, or hoped not to. The forest answered before her thoughts could settle. Another branch snapped, closer this time. Her heartbeat hammered. She fumbled for the cabin's security monitor, a solar-powered system Mark installed to watch for bears or wandering hikers. When the screen lit up, the soft static hum of the camera feed trembled through the quiet room. Emily tapped the icon for the backwoods camera. The image sharpened. At first she saw nothing but trees, thick trunks, jagged shadows, a scatter of old snow. Then something moved in the distance, a shape, large, dark, too fluid to be a person, too quiet to be a deer. It slipped between two pines with a predator's confidence. Emily's breath caught. The cub must have sensed the same thing long before she did. He turned sharply, staring at the exact spot where the shape vanished. His fur bristled, rising along his spine. He issued a low, throaty sound, not a growl, not a cry, but something deeper, the kind of instinctive voice an animal used long before language ever existed. Liam whimpered, pressing his forehead into her collar. Emily held him tighter, whispering reassurance she didn't feel. She glanced again at the security feed, switching between cameras. A second movement flared across the screen, then vanished. Something was circling, something big, something calculating. She swallowed. "It's okay," she murmured, more to herself than the baby. "It's just wildlife." But she'd lived in these mountains long enough to know that wasn't entirely true. Wildlife was a catch-all term people used in insurance policies and home security brochures. Out here, predators didn't obey human assumptions. They didn't fear fences, cameras, or warm porch lights. They followed opportunity. She stepped back from the window and dimmed the cabin lights until only the soft amber glow of the fireplace illuminated the room. The darkness felt safer than visibility. Predators were less likely to approach bright spaces. At least, that's what the outdoor safety guides always said. It reminded her of the online survival articles she'd skim after college lectures, content wedged awkwardly between ads for high-yield savings accounts or health insurance plans. A sudden thump shook the porch rail. Emily spun toward the window. The cub had leapt onto the porch steps, despite his injury, positioning himself directly in front of the door. He pressed. His body close to the wood, head angled toward the forest, listening. His ears flicked in tight, sharp movements. His breath steamed in small bursts. And then, again. Tap, tap, tap. This time louder. This wasn't a random pattern. This was urgency. Emily tried to calm herself, but her nerves quivered with an uncomfortable truth. The cub wasn't here by accident, and he wasn't approaching Liam out of curiosity. He was reacting to something she couldn't yet see, something closing in on the cabin. Another noise cut through the woods, a dragging sound, deliberate, slow. Liam whimpered again, his body tightening in her arms. The cub snarled, a short, sharp warning sound that echoed off the porch walls and vibrated through the window pane. Emily took a shaky breath. Something was out there, something that frightened even a predator. She stepped back from the window, clutching Liam to her chest as the porch light flickered overhead. The mountain lion cub lowered himself, tail sweeping the boards, muscles drawn tight. The forest went silent, completely silent. Not a bird, not the wind, not even the creek. And in that unnatural quiet, Emily finally understood. The cub hadn't escaped his pen. He had come to the cabin on purpose, because whatever was moving through the pines tonight had come for more than wandering prey. It had come toward the cabin, and toward the baby in her arms. The tapping wasn't noise, it was a warning. "God," she whispered, rocking Liam softly, "what do you hear out there?" The cub didn't turn, didn't blink, didn't breathe for a moment. He simply stared into the darkness, bracing for something she could not yet see. Then, far off in the trees, a hollow, predatory cry cut through the ridge, and the real danger finally made its presence known. The cry drifting through the timberline was not a mountain lion's call. It was deeper, flatter, a sound that lingered in the cold air like a warning carved into the dark. Emily froze where she stood, every instinct in her body tightening as the echo faded into the trees. Liam whimpered again, his small fingers clutching her collar with a strength she didn't know he had. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, her breath trembling against his skin. Outside the window, the mountain lion cub shifted his stance, lowering himself closer to the porch boards. His body moved with that same strange mixture of fear and resolve, like he knew exactly what was coming, and he had known long before any human ever heard the first crack in the forest. His injured leg shook, but he did not retreat. He stayed by the door, a lone sentinel with instincts older than the ridge itself. Emily forced herself toward the security monitor again. Her fingers shook as she tapped the feed for the north-facing camera, the one angled toward the slope leading down to the frozen creek. The image came into focus, dark shapes of trees, patches of snow, and nothing more. She held her breath and switched to the eastern camera. Still nothing, just silence and shadows swallowing the ground. Then the western camera flickered. A shape darted across the frame, low, fast, heavy. Emily's stomach dropped. She rewound the footage with a trembling thumb and played it again more slowly. The shape was unmistakable this time. The heavy shoulders, the long stride, the narrower snout. A wolf, not a pack, not a howl from far away. This one was alone, moving with the purposeful, straight-line motion of a predator following a scent. Wolves didn't travel the ridge often. They stuck to the valleys where elk gathered, and the ground softened near the waterways. But tonight, something had pushed one up the slope, something strong enough to draw a hunter straight to the walker's cabin. The cub tapped the porch again. 2 taps, a pause, then 2 more. The rhythm echoed through the wooden frame of the house. Liam startled at the sound, but didn't cry. Emily felt that faint prickle of fear crawl across her skin again. This wasn't a coincidence, not the tapping, not the cub's sudden appearance, not the wolf circling somewhere beyond the reach of the porch light. A sudden crash snapped her head toward the front of the cabin. Something slammed into the metal garbage bin near the woodshed. The sound ricocheted across the ridge, sending crows bursting out of the treetops. The cub's ears flattened, and he let out a guttural, defensive rumble that Emily had not heard before, low and broken, like a warning pulled from the deepest part of his young chest. Emily clutched Liam tighter. "It's just wildlife," she whispered, but even as she said it, the lie tasted thin. Wildlife did not behave like this. Wildlife did not test the perimeter of a home with the patience of something weighing its options. And wildlife did not send a wounded mountain lion cub bolting toward a porch in fear. Then the forest answered with another movement, but this time it wasn't a wolf. From the corner of the western camera, a second shape moved between the trees. Taller, slower, the kind of movement that belonged to something on 2 legs, not 4. Emily's breath hitched. She blinked hard and leaned closer, trying to sharpen the image with her mind even though the camera had already done what it could. A human figure drifted through the trees, wrapped in a dark coat, hood up, hands at their sides, watching the cabin with unnerving stillness. "No," Emily whispered, feeling her heart hammering harder. This ridge didn't get hikers at night. People didn't wander out here without reason. And those who did always made noise, calling out for directions or apologizing for trespassing. But this figure didn't call out, didn't move toward the cabin, didn't step away. He was just standing there, half hidden behind a trunk, angled perfectly toward the porch. The cub turned too, sensing the shift in direction, even though there was no sound. He stared straight toward the trees where the figure lingered. Then, as if peeling back the night itself, the wolf appeared again, pacing several yards behind the human shape, both predator and person converging toward the same point. The cabin. Emily's breath grew shallow. Her mind ran through every safety guideline she'd ever read. Install motion lights, keep emergency contacts, check insurance details, stay calm during wildlife encounters. But none of it applied here. None of it explained why a hunter and a stranger moved through the woods at the same time, drawn to the same small home on the ridge. The wolf stepped into the clearing, nose down, sniffing the air. He made a slow circle, each pass bringing him closer to the porch steps, closer to the cub, closer to the baby in her arms. The cub growled, louder this time. Emily flinched as the sound vibrated against the glass. She backed away, holding Liam tight, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Please, just stay back." She wasn't sure who she was begging, the animal outside or the one inside herself that trembled with rising panic. Through the window she saw it clearly now. The wolf lifted his head and locked eyes with the cub. A deep, silent acknowledgement passed between them. The kind animals understood. A challenge, a warning, a promise. The wolf took one step forward. The cub stepped onto the first porch stair. Emily gasped. "No, please!" Another sound erupted from the forest, this time harsher. A shrill cry, a frantic scrabble of hooves. A doe, burst through the brush, stumbling into the clearing with blood streaking her hind leg. She limped across the snowy ground, breath harsh and ragged, collapsing near the old fence. The wolf's attention snapped toward her instantly. So did the stranger's shadow. Emily felt her world tilt. This wasn't random wildlife behavior. This was a chase that had been unfolding long before she ever stepped onto the porch. The doe wasn't just wounded. She was fleeing both predator and person, and both had followed her straight to the cabin. The cub didn't retreat. He didn't run. He stood his ground on the porch, positioning himself exactly between Liam and everything outside: wolf, stranger, darkness. He spread his stance wider, ignoring his injured leg, ignoring the cold, driven only by something innate and ancient. Emily trembled. Liam whimpered into her sweater. The ridge seemed to hold its breath again. The wolf lifted his head, sniffed, and took another step toward the porch. The stranger behind the trees shifted, just enough for the camera to catch him turning closer. Emily whispered into the silence, "What are you all doing out here tonight, and why did you come to us?" The cub lowered himself, growling once more, bracing for something she still could not see clearly. And as the last light of day surrendered to the mountain darkness, Emily finally understood that none of this began with her, or the cabin, or even the injured cub. Something older had been set into motion, something dangerous, and it was now standing at her doorstep. The night closed around the ridge with a heaviness Emily had never felt before. It wasn't the kind of darkness that came from a sunset or a passing storm. It was thicker, older, pressing against the cabin walls as though something outside wanted to swallow the light whole. She stepped back from the window, her arms tightening around Liam as the baby buried his face against her shoulder. His breath trembled, warm and frantic. The mountain lion cub on the porch held his ground, crouched low, staring into the clearing where the doe had fallen. A long, thin whine rose from the wolf. Not a howl. Howls carried across miles. This sound was closer, sharper, the kind predators used right before striking. The cub answered with a guttural warning, his fur lifting along his spine. Even through the glass, Emily felt the vibration of his small courage. He was hurt. He was young. But something in him refused to yield. Then it happened. A violent crack split the night as the wolf lunged for the dying doe. Snow and dirt flew in a burst of chaos. The doe kicked once, weakly, her hooves scraping against the frozen earth. The wolf's jaws clamped down. The scene unfolded so quickly, Emily couldn't breathe. But the cub didn't flinch. Instead, he pivoted, not toward the wolf, but toward the left side of the cabin. And for the first time, Emily heard it too. Footsteps, not animal footsteps. Slow, heavy, two-beat rhythm, crunching through layers of snow with intention. The human figure she'd glimpsed on the security feed emerged from between the pines, still far away, but close enough now that the porch light caught the glint of metal in his hand. Her heart dropped. A trapper. She'd heard about them online, the kind who trespassed on remote properties, tracking animals for illegal trade. Articles about property crime and rural home insurance warnings flashed in her mind, suddenly too real. She held Liam tighter, knowing the cabin felt painfully small against both man and beast. The cub let out a sharp cry and bolted toward the sound, despite his injured leg. He made it only a few feet before faltering, but he didn't stop. He dragged himself forward, turning his body sideways as if to make himself look larger, braver, anything to keep the stranger away from the cabin. "Stop," Emily whispered, pressing a trembling hand to the glass. "You're hurt." "Please stop." But the cub didn't hear her. Or maybe he did and didn't care. His instincts were louder than pain. The wolf snapped its head up from the doe's body. Blood streaked the snow. The predator's gaze shifted from its kill to the cub, then to the cabin door, then to the shadowed figure stepping closer through the trees. It was no longer hunting the doe. The fresh scent, the warmth, the movement, everything inside the cabin pulled its attention like a magnet. The trapper raised his hand, and a thin whistle cut through the clearing. The wolf turned. He wasn't alone. He wasn't hunting by chance. The man was directing him. Emily staggered back from the window, her breath breaking into short, painful gasps. This wasn't random wildlife behavior. This was orchestrated. The wolf wasn't circling because the ridge drew him. He was circling because the man wanted him to. A trained predator, a controlled threat. And the cabin, isolated, warm, lit by soft yellow lamps, was the target. Liam began to cry, tiny wails tightening into sharp sobs. The cub jerked at the sound, spinning toward the window. His tail swept sideways, protective, frantic. He tapped his paw on the porch again, harder this time. Tap, 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 tap. The rhythm shifted like a plea. Emily didn't know what it meant, but the urgency pressed against her chest. The trapper stepped into view of the front camera, his coat dark against the snow. He scanned the porch, then the windows, then the shadows behind him. The wolf moved beside him, tail low, muscles tight. The man lifted something, maybe binoculars, maybe a camera lens, maybe a scope. Emily didn't stay to find out. She backed away from the window and stumbled toward the living room, her mind racing through every emergency instruction she'd ever read. Lock the doors, turn off the lights, call for help. But when she grabbed her phone, the signal bar flickered once, then collapsed. No service? Of course. The ridge always dropped signal during winter storms. She refreshed the screen again, uselessly. The tiny SOS-only symbol stared back at her. The cabin groaned suddenly, wood straining under pressure like something heavy brushed against the back wall. Emily spun toward the hallway that led to the kitchen. The sound came again. A dull scrape, a shifting weight. Something was behind the house. She edged toward the kitchen door, her steps slow and uneven. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Liam's cries softened into trembling whimpers. She reached the door and listened. Nothing at first. Then a single, low growl seeped through the wood from the outside. Emily jerked back. It wasn't the wolf. The voice was deeper, rawer, vibrating through the frame like a warning from the earth itself. Her heart pounded wildly. The cub, he wasn't alone out there anymore. Another thump hit the door, stronger this time, rattling the pots hanging near the stove. Emily gasped and stumbled back, clutching Liam against her chest so tightly he pressed beneath her chin. A shadow moved past the kitchen window, a broad shape, gliding with predatory precision. The cub's growl rose in pitch, echoing across the porch. Then the wolf charged. The porch boards exploded with noise as claws scraped and collided. Emily didn't have to look to know the cub was caught in a desperate fight he could not win. She darted back into the living room, scanning for anything she could use as protection. A fire poker, a heavy lantern, anything. Before she could reach it, something slammed into the front door. Hard, once, twice, a third time. The wood shuddered. Dust drifted from the frame. The trapper's silhouette crossed the window again. He tried the handle, slowly at first, then violently. The door held, but the sound tore a scream from Emily's throat. Liam cried harder, his body trembling in her arms. From the porch came another sharp snarl, followed by a pained yelp that sliced straight through Emily's chest. She felt her knees weaken. The cub wasn't just warning anymore, he was fighting and losing. The wolf lunged again, its weight hitting the railing. Snow flew across the window. Emily forced herself toward the hallway, her feet moving through panic-heavy air. She had to get to the bedroom. Somewhere she could barricade the door. Somewhere she could hide. Somewhere. The thud came from inside the cabin this time. Inside. Not the door, not the porch. Inside the walls. A soft, deliberate creak. Right outside Liam's room. Emily froze mid-step, blood rushing to her ears. She turned her head slowly, afraid to see what had moved. The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the fireplace behind her. She squinted into the shadows. The air felt colder there, heavier, as though something sucked the warmth out of the wood. Another creak. Slow, measured, human. Someone had reached the back of the cabin. Someone had slipped around the porch and was testing each entry point. The trapper wasn't just directing the wolf. He was searching for a way in. Emily clutched Liam closer, feeling the baby's tears warm her collar. The cabin's lights flickered once, the generator humming under strain. Her breath came short and sharp as the hallway seemed to narrow. The cub's cry rose outside, high, pained, defiant. Emily's fear twisted into something else, an urgent, aching desperation she had never felt before. She couldn't leave the cub outside to die. But she couldn't open the door. She couldn't outrun a wolf. And she couldn't stand against a grown man intent on breaking in. The cabin shook again as the wolf slammed into the porch rail. The trapper whispered something low, almost coaxing. The cub tapped the floor through the porch, once, twice again, barely audible now. Emily stepped backward into the living room, tears stinging her eyes as the walls creaked around her. The night was no longer a wilderness, it was a trap closing in, and the only creature trying to protect her was out there, alone, bleeding, fighting against a predator twice his size. "Please," she whispered into the dim air, her voice trembling. "Someone help him?" But the ridge answered only with the sounds of struggle outside the door. Until, suddenly, everything went silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that meant something had changed. Something was coming next. The silence outside the cabin was so sudden, so absolute, that Emily felt her heartbeat become the loudest sound in the room. Even Liam, hiccuping softly against her shoulder, sensed the shift. His tiny fingers clutched the collar of her flannel shirt as though the stillness itself frightened him. She moved slowly toward the bedroom, each step careful, controlled, terrified of touching the wrong floorboard and drawing attention from whatever was prowling outside or inside. The hallway remained dark, breathing with the faint hum of the generator. No footsteps, no scratching, no growls, nothing. And yet the absence of noise felt more dangerous than the chaos before it. Predators didn't go silent unless they were stalking. People didn't go silent unless they were planning. And the ridge didn't go silent unless nature itself braced for something greater. Emily swallowed hard and reached the bedroom door. She nudged it open with her foot and stepped inside. The room felt safe only in memory, in the soft crib, the stacked blankets, the scent of baby lotion, the glow of a nightlight still shaped like a tiny moon. But tonight the shadows pressed in against the walls, waiting. She shut the door quietly, leaned her back against it, and slid the lock into place. Liam trembled in her arms. She whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll stay here until it's over." She didn't know what "it" meant. She only knew it wasn't finished. A sudden thud hit the siding outside the bedroom wall. Emily gasped and jerked her head toward the sound. The wolf had circled again, its heavy body pressed against the narrow gap between the cabin and the woodpile. She heard it inhale, slow, deliberate, smelling for warmth, for movement, for life. The animal's presence radiated through the boards, heavy enough to steal breath. Then a deeper sound rolled through the ridge. A roar, not loud but powerful. It vibrated in her ribs, a wild declaration that froze the wolf in place. Emily knew that voice instantly. Every Colorado local knew it. A fully grown mountain lion. A mother. Her voice wasn't questioning or calling across territory. It was a warning, a claim, and she was close. The wolf retreated immediately, claws scraping against ice as it shifted away from the wall. Emily couldn't see the cub, but she could hear faint panting, weak and uneven. He was still alive, still standing, or trying to. A sharp boom hit the back of the cabin, a shoulder, a paw, a body slamming into the siding. The wolf was not trying to fight the adult lion. He was being forced into motion. Something outside was pushing him, driving him back toward the clearing. Emily hurried to the window in the bedroom and lifted the curtain a fraction of an inch. Moonlight spilled over the snow, revealing two silhouettes moving fast, one small and stumbling, the other large and deliberate. The cub limped toward the porch again, barely able to stay upright. Behind him, emerging like an ancient phantom from the shadowed pines, came the mother lion. Her massive shoulders shifted with each step, muscles rolling under her winter coat. She was breathtaking and terrifying, a living reminder of the wilderness insurance brochures always warned about, yet no policy could ever prepare a person for her presence. Her golden eyes scanned the clearing with a calculation that didn't belong to panic but purpose. She was not hunting, she was protecting, and she was looking for the thing that had hurt her cub. The wolf burst into the clearing then, stumbling over the doe's body as it tried to escape her path. The mother lion lunged, not a full attack, no claws, no killing strike. Just a violent, dominating shove that sent the wolf tumbling across the snow until it regained footing and fled toward the tree line, tail tucked low. But the danger wasn't gone, because the man was still out there. Emily's breath caught as she scanned the cameras again. The western feed flickered once, twice, then settled. The trapper had moved closer to the cabin. His shadow stretched long across the snow, and he paused near the corner of the porch as though calculating the mother's exact distance. He held something in his right hand, long and thin. A tranquilizer gun? A snare? Hunting gear wasn't unfamiliar to mountain folks, but nothing about this moment felt like regulated wildlife control. The cub, now barely able to stand, dragged himself near the porch post. He tipped sideways and caught himself with a trembling paw. The mother lion saw it. She turned fully then, eyes narrowing, body lifting taller, breath steaming like smoke in the cold air. The trapper stepped closer. Emily shook her head in disbelief. "Don't," she whispered, as if he could hear her through the walls. "Don't you dare go near him." She didn't know if the man was after the lion, the wolf, or the cub, but she knew he didn't belong on this ridge. She recognized something in his movements, calculated caution layered with arrogance. This wasn't a hiker who got lost. This was someone who expected to find valuable animals tonight. Someone who moved through the wilderness knowing how to command a wolf and corner a mountain lion cub. And the cub had run toward the cabin because he knew the mother was coming. Emily backed away from the window, gripping Liam's small body tighter. She remembered the government-issued pamphlets taped to the community bulletin board in town, warnings about illegal wildlife trafficking and environmental crime. She'd skimmed them casually once, between picking up groceries and looking at mortgage rates printed on the bank's brochures. It all felt distant then, like reading an article about a city on the other side of the country. Tonight, that danger had walked to her doorstep. The wolf reappeared at the far edge of the clearing, pacing in jagged movements, torn between fleeing and obeying whatever commands its handler had given. The mother lion took a single step toward it, not in fear, but dominance. The wolf lowered its head in submission. Then the man whispered something too faint for the cameras to capture. The wolf turned back toward the cabin. Emily's heart lurched. She stepped backward until she hit the dresser. The bedroom's wooden floor creaked beneath her weight, the sound too loud in the suffocating quiet. That was when the kitchen door rattled again. Harder this time. Emily's blood went cold. The trapper had circled the cabin. She could hear his boots scraping against the porch planks as he tested the lock. The handle turned once, twice, but the latch held. Liam clung to her shirt, crying softly now. Not loud enough for the trapper to hear, but loud enough to stab at her already fraying nerves. The wolf howled, short, sharp, aggressive. The cub answered with a desperate, broken cry that made Emily's throat tighten painfully. And then the mother lion roared, not the way animals usually did, not to claim territory or scare prey. This was deeper, primal, slicing the night in half. The cabin windows shook in their frames. Snow fell from the roof in a soft cascade. The wolf bolted. Even the trapper faltered, his hand slipping from the kitchen door handle. The mother lion stepped fully into the porch light, her fur glowing gold against the snow, her breath forming thick clouds in the freezing air. She looked at the cub, then at the door where Emily and Liam hid inside, then at the darkness where the man had retreated. She knew. She knew who had hurt her baby. She knew where he'd gone, and she knew he wasn't finished yet. The cub tapped the porch floor again, his paw trembling with each touch. Tap, tap, tap. A new rhythm. Weak, urgent. Emily pressed a hand over her mouth as tears blurred her vision. "He's telling her," she whispered. "He's telling her where the danger is." The mother lion growled low, a sound that dropped into the earth and came back heavier. She moved toward the side of the cabin, following the scent, following the man, following the fear that had brought her cub here. For a moment, Emily felt hope rising, a fragile, trembling hope that the predator outside was no longer the one she had to fear most. But then the generator flickered again. The camera feeds cut out for a full second, and when the image returned, the trapper was standing much closer to the door than before. Far too close. Emily clutched Liam tight as the shadows of the ridge curled around the cabin. Something was about to break. Something was about to enter. And the mountain lion mother was no longer the only force waking inside the dark. The ridge held its breath as the trapper stepped closer to the cabin door. His shadow stretched across the porch, merging with the dim outline of the wolf lurking near the tree line. Emily backed into the far corner of the bedroom, clutching Liam so tightly his small heartbeat pulsed against her chest. Her pulse thudded in her ears, a frantic drum beneath the oppressive stillness. The generator flickered again, the lights dimming just enough to make the room feel colder, narrower, more breakable. Then came the sound that shattered the silence. A single, sharp crack against the porch, wood splintering under heavy weight. The mother lion had returned. Emily's breath caught as she heard her move. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the frost-coated boards, each one a statement carved into the night. The wolf let out a choked yelp and scrambled backward, snow kicking into the air. The trapper cursed under his breath, the first sound she'd heard him make. He shifted direction, boots thudding across the porch toward the kitchen entrance, but the lion followed, her growl rolling like distant thunder across the clearing. The security monitor blinked back to life on the dresser. Emily didn't remember turning it on. It must have rebooted itself when the generator flickered. The bedroom screen glowed with the porch camera feed, grainy but clear enough to see shapes moving outside. The mother lion's massive form stepped into the frame, her head low, muscles rippling as she stalked forward. The cub, broken and limping, dragged himself into the lower corner of the image, trying to stand between his mother and the cabin, still guarding the front door even as his body failed him. "Oh, sweetheart," Emily whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You don't have to anymore." But he did. In his mind, he had no choice. The trapper appeared suddenly on the feed, half-shadowed, raising a tranquilizer rifle. The screen trembled with static as the wind drove sleet against the lens. Emily tensed, wanting to scream, wanting to warn the lion outside, but her voice locked itself inside her chest. Liam stirred, sensing her terror, his little fists clutching at her sweater with desperate insistence. The trapper steadied his aim. He took one step onto the top stair. And then the mother lion struck. She moved faster than the camera could track, one moment poised, the next a golden blur launching forward with a roar so violent the porch light flickered under its force. The rifle flew from the man's hands, skidding across the boards. He stumbled backward and fell into the snow, scrambling away on elbows and knees. The wolf fled instantly, sprinting toward the lower ridge. The trapper did not get that chance. The mother lion did not attack him fully, not the way she could have. She cornered him, roaring into his face, her paws planted on either side of where he lay. It was a warning, a promise of what she would do if he ever came near her cub again. The camera shook as she growled, breath steaming into the cold night like smoke lit by moonlight. Emily gasped when another camera feed blinked onto the screen. The bedroom monitor had begun switching views automatically. The living room feed came up next. She saw the front door rattle violently, wood buckling under the combined strain from earlier. Snow fell through a small crack where the doorframe had split. Then another sound came, a slow tapping. From the porch, tap, 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 tap. Emily's breath caught. She knew that rhythm. The cub had crawled to the doorway. He lay on his side now, paws trembling. He tapped again weakly, his claws barely touching the wood. Not a warning, not this time. A plea. A signal to the only creature who had listened to him, his mother. The bedroom camera switched once more, showing the clearing again. The mother lion turned sharply at the sound. She looked toward the cabin, then down at her cub. Her body softened, not with weakness, but with something achingly close to sorrow. She stepped toward him, lowering her head until her nose touched the top of his skull. The tiny motion held more tenderness than Emily had ever seen in the wild, more love than any documentary or online wildlife article could ever truly capture. And then something else, something Emily hadn't expected, bloomed in that moment. Liam stopped crying. His sobs faded into soft little breaths, his eyes blinking open as if he felt the air shift around him. The cub lifted his head just enough to look through the cracked doorway. His golden eyes found Liam in the shadows, and even through the broken glass and flickering lights, the connection was unmistakable. He tapped once more, soft, nearly silent. Emily pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. "You're telling him you're okay, or trying to be." The mother lion turned her gaze toward the cabin window, then toward Emily and the baby. Emily felt the weight of that stare, the fierce intelligence behind it. It was not accusation. It was not threat. It was acknowledgement, recognition. An understanding passed between two mothers, even if Emily wasn't technically one yet. Outside, the trapper scrambled to his feet and ran. The mother lion didn't chase him. Her focus was on her cub and the humans inside who had sheltered him when she could not. The wolf disappeared into the trees, its footfalls fading down the ridge until the night swallowed it. The cameras held stillness for the first time in hours. Emily unlocked the bedroom door and stepped into the living room on shaking legs. She kept Liam tightly against her chest as she approached the front door. Through the cracked frame, cold air seeped into the cabin, carrying the scent of pine, snow, and something older, the scent of the wild world reclaiming its balance. She opened the door just enough to speak through it. Her voice came out as a soft, trembling whisper. "He's safe now. Thank you. Thank you for coming back for him." The mother lion blinked slowly, her breath visible in soft waves. Then she stepped aside, giving Emily a clear view of the cub. The little lion struggled upright, wobbling as he placed one paw in front of the other. He approached the threshold and, with unbearable gentleness, pressed his forehead against the frame of the door, not pushing inside, not crossing the boundary, just acknowledging the child he had guarded. He tapped once more on the porch. Tap, 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 a final time. Tap. The mother lion turned toward the forest. She waited for her cub to join her, patience etched in every line of her powerful body. The cub took one last look at Emily and Liam, then limped down the steps after her. Red and blue lights began to glow faintly through the trees. Sirens drifted up the ridge in the distance, slow at first, then clearer. Relief washed through Emily so forcefully she nearly fell to her knees. She held Liam close, whispering to him as the cameras recorded the final moments of the night. The mother lion paused at the edge of the clearing. She glanced back one final time. Then she and her cub disappeared into the forest, swallowed by the ancient darkness that had shaped them. By the time the officers arrived, breathless, armed, confused, the cameras had already captured everything. The trapper's presence, the wolf's circling, the cub's desperate warnings, the mother's intervention, and the moment when the little lion had rested his head against Liam's foot before leaving. Footage the world would later watch in disbelief. Footage that would prove what Emily already knew deep in her heart. The baby had been protected tonight, not by steel locks, phone apps, or rural security guidelines, but by a wounded mountain lion cub whose instincts were stronger than fear, and by a mother whose love was fiercer than any threat on the ridge. "Thank you," Emily whispered to the empty doorway as the lights of the patrol trucks washed through the snow. "Thank you for everything." And somewhere in the dark timberline, a soft tapping echoed faintly, a promise that the wild never forgets those who show mercy.